They said the White House was built on honor, but when the rain falls just right on Pennsylvania Avenue, the earth remembers what it was forced to forget. Flickering black and white footage, thunder rolls over the Capitol dome. The camera moves low, beneath the ground, through soil, through rock, through time, until it finds them, hundreds of shackled wrists, buried in silence. The narrator's voice is slow, solemn, but sharp. In 1792, enslaved hands raised the walls of freedom, but what no history book mentions is the room they were told never to leave. Cut to archival drawings, laborers digging at night under torchlight. A ledger flashes, room 0 do not record. A sound, faint, metallic, echoes like a breath under stone. The screen goes black, the words fade in. The White House was built on chains. In 1801, when President Jefferson ordered the East Wing expansion, he dismissed the records of a man named Isaiah Bell, a free black stonemason hired for the foundation. Weeks later, Bell disappeared. His last sketchbook, recovered in 1904, shows a series of floor plans that don't exist. Tunnels, sublevels, a spiral descending under the Oval Room. Historians called them errors, but Bell's daughter, interviewed in 1838, spoke of voices her father heard from the stones. He said they weren't slaves, they were older, they were waiting. A diary from a housemaid, Eleanor Marsh, confirms strange orders. The president says no one is to enter the east subcellar. The walls hum when the bells toll. Every president since has quietly remodeled parts of the basement, yet the blueprints never match. The foundations move, they say, the air shifts, and when the plaster cracks, the same words appear. Remember the room below. 1936, during renovations under President Roosevelt, workers uncover a walled archway beneath the state dining room. Inside, pews of petrified wood, 12 kneelers, and a single rusted chain running down the center aisle like a spine. They call it the Servants' Chapel, but no record exists of its construction. Roosevelt ordered it sealed within hours. One of the workers, Frank Morrow, wrote in a private letter to his wife, "It wasn't a chapel. It was a theater of suffering. The air felt thick like someone's breath filled it centuries ago and never left." 3 weeks later, Morrow was found dead, eyes open, lungs full of dust. The coroner called it asphyxiation by unknown cause. The government issued a gag order on all who'd seen it. That year, a quiet memo circulated in the archives of the National Park Service. Subterranean structures to remain undisclosed. Origins pre-colonial. Human remains probable. A bell, blackened with soot, hangs today in the White House sub-basement. Visitors never see it, but staff call it the morning bell. It rings on its own, never loudly, only once before deaths of significance. It rang on April 12, 1945, the morning Roosevelt died. It rang on November 22, 1963. It rang on September 11, 2001, but no one remembers installing it. When a team of restorers tried to remove it in 1989, they found its clapper fused to what appeared to be calcified bone. In faint light, beneath corrosion, a single line of inscription is visible, forged from our silence. The National Archives lists the artifact as colonial ironwork, undocumented. But metallurgical tests show impurities never found in American soil. It wasn't forged here, it was brought here. The phrase reappears again and again in records, private notes, even presidential correspondences. The room below. Eleanor Marsh's 1803 diary describes a locked stairwell near the East Wing. She writes, "I heard the chains beneath the floor move. The men say it's the pipes, but the pipes weep when the moon is full. By 1840, the stairwell was sealed. By 1928, its existence erased." In 2014, a low-frequency scan of the White House substructure revealed an unregistered cavity 60 feet beneath the foundation. Perfectly circular, no records of excavation, no entryway, just one thing, a single continuous pulse, too regular to be natural. Like a heart still beating in the dark. In 1947, archivist Margaret Vail was assigned to catalog early White House renovation files. She was meticulous and deeply curious. Among a series of mislabeled Civil War-era crates, she discovered a folder titled "Whisper Archive Restricted Until Review by Executive Order." Inside, sketches of underground chambers, transcriptions of whispered phrases recorded by maintenance crews, and photographs of wall carvings resembling West African Adinkra symbols, but distorted, reversed as if mirrored through trauma. One line in Margaret's handwriting survives. These are not blueprints, they are scars. Someone built a language out of pain. 2 weeks later, she was reassigned. The archives where she worked were destroyed in a containment fire. No official record remains. But a carbon copy of her final memo circulates among historians of the occult. They're not haunting the house is haunting itself. In 1952, Washington, D.C., experienced a small but unexplained earthquake centered directly beneath the White House lawn. Local orphanages reported strange incidents that same week, children waking at exactly 3:07 a.m., eyes open, chanting names no one taught them. A caretaker at St. Bridget's Home for Colored Orphans, Miss Lillian Moore, wrote, "They said they were being called to the White House. They said the floor there was crying. The government's response was swift and silent. The orphanage was shuttered within a month, citing sanitation violations. Every child was relocated, yet no adoption records exist. But D.C. residents still speak of the procession. The night a line of children walked barefoot down Pennsylvania Avenue in the rain, toward the gates of the White House. No one stopped them. No one saw them again. Presidential staff began reporting an untraceable sound during Truman's administration. A slow rhythm underfoot, like a heartbeat embedded in the architecture. Engineers traced it to the foundations beneath the East Room, but the pulse vanished whenever approached. Truman himself noted in a private letter unreleased until decades later, "It is not a machine. It breathes when the nation mourns." Theories spread quietly among maintenance staff that the structure feeds on national tragedy, that it requires memory to stay standing. During reconstruction, workers unearthed a section of older stone, darker than the rest, uncut, raw, almost flesh-like in texture. When light struck it, the heartbeat stopped. When darkness returned, it resumed. By 1960, preservationists noticed an anomaly. Sections of the White House basement appeared younger than they should. Concrete poured in 1930 showed no aging. Iron bolts had not rusted. It was as if something below absorbed decay. A hidden memo from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reads, "Biological factors suspected in foundation stabilization. Recommend no further excavation." A janitor, later interviewed by a journalist, described hearing whispers when cleaning near the furnace shaft. They said, "We are still building." He quit 2 days later, claiming he saw footprints in wet cement leading downward into solid ground. The nation's bicentennial, fireworks over the National Mall, the president's voice echoing through millions of televisions, 200 years of liberty. But inside the White House kitchen, the staff reported all the milk curdled overnight. Photographs taken during the celebration show faint, human-shaped smears in the windows behind the East Room curtains. A historian named Pauline Givens, attending as a guest, claimed to hear chains dragging under the floor during the anthem. She later wrote a single sentence in her diary before disappearing on her way home. "They are celebrating in the house of their captors." 3 weeks later, a gardener discovered bones in the soil behind the rose garden. The report was buried under routine excavation, but the bones were not animal, and the DNA quietly tested years later matched none from any known human lineage. The surviving pages from Margaret Vale's journal end abruptly in 1947, but decades later, a graduate researcher named Evan Reid claimed he began dreaming the rest. Every night he walked through corridors that smelled of lime and rain. The marble above him turned soft, as if the stone itself remembered being clay. Behind each door a whisper waited, "Catalog what we lost." In the dream, the shelves weren't filled with paper. They were lined with faces, pressed flat and thin as photographs, each labeled with a date the nation forgot: 1807, 1863, 1919, 1928. When Evan tried to read them, the letters rearranged into prayers. When he woke, his hands were coated in dust that smelled of iron. He began recording the dreams as though they were government transcripts. Record 01 Subterranean Archive. Documents are breathing. Memory is a living thing that refuses to die when buried. Friends said he was changing, his voice lower, slower, as though another speaker shared his lungs. When he lectured, the lights dimmed without reason. Students described hearing a pulse in the floor. In his final tape, Evan whispered, "The White House isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by the silence that built it." The recording ends with the faint sound of a door opening underground and a single phrase repeated in two voices at once. "History is awake." Evan stopped dreaming for 3 nights. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't sleep that carried him down. It was the sound, a vibration through the soles of his shoes, low, patient, almost merciful. It felt like the building itself was breathing through him. He began walking the city at night, tracing old construction maps under a red streetlight. Each turn drew him closer to the White House, but he never reached it. The streets folded, repeating like a sentence rewritten by guilt. In his notebook he wrote, "There is no tunnel, there is only descent." That phrase became his obsession. He realized the room below was never a location. It was a condition. The deeper he looked into America's archives, the more he saw that every erased name, every unsigned record, every vanished child was a brick in that unseen chamber. He started recording his own history as if it belonged to someone else. 1902, my grandfather laid stone in Virginia. 1947, my mother cleaned offices where no windows opened. 2025, I breathed the dust of both. One night he stood at the fence along Pennsylvania Avenue. The wind carried a metallic scent like rain hitting old blood. For a moment the ground beneath him felt soft again, like clay stirred awake. Evan whispered, "If I keep digging, I will not find bones. I will find the part of us that wanted to forget." The streetlights flickered. A sound rose from the pavement, neither machine nor voice, but something between heartbeat and drum. It said only one thing, "Open the record." Evan followed the sound until it ceased to echo. Silence like that has a weight. It presses behind the eyes and makes the world shimmer at the edges. He placed the old tape recorder on his desk and began to speak into it, not as a historian, but as if performing an invocation. This is the national record. This is the sound of a country trying to remember. Static filled the room, slow, deliberate static, each crackle forming a syllable. He could almost hear words under it, name them, one by one. So he did. He began reading the ledger of every enslaved builder he could trace through half-erased files. Each name he spoke seemed to draw breath into the tape itself. The reels turned faster, then slower, like lungs. When he stopped, the silence felt disappointed. He realized then the recording wasn't capturing his voice. It was listening. And when he played it back, the whisper that answered was his own voice shifted, older, deeper, more certain. The room is not below. The room is wherever we refuse to listen. Books slid from the shelves without touch. A page from Margaret Vale's recovered notes drifted to the floor. On it, a line he'd never read before appeared in fresh ink. When the record opens, the country dreams itself backward. That night Evan dreamt he was walking into the Oval Office, but it was filled with water, clear and still. Beneath it lay hundreds of mirrors. Each reflection showed the same thing, not presidents or slaves, but one face split into both, each struggling to breathe through the other. He woke whispering the next line of the record, "Memory wants a witness." By morning, Evan could no longer tell when he was awake. His apartment had begun to shift in small, impossible ways, angles softening, light bending at the corners. It was as if the architecture around him was trying to remember another shape. He sat on the floor beside the recorder, whispering the names again. Each one echoed differently now, longer, clearer, like a breath finally taken. He realized what Margaret Vale and the others had meant. The act of naming was the act of release. In the mirror across the room, his reflection lagged a heartbeat behind him. When it finally caught up, it spoke first. "Witnessing isn't looking," it said. "It's letting what was hidden see through you." He didn't move. The words were his, but the tone wasn't measured, tired, certain. He looked at his hands and saw a faint dust in the lines of his palms, glowing faintly, pulsing to the rhythm that had followed him for weeks. He understood then that the room was never meant to be opened with doors or shovels. It opens in the body. It opens when denial gives way. He pressed record again. The reel turned by itself, the tape unspooling smoothly, almost reverently. "If I disappear," he said, "do not look for me underground. Look wherever the floor still hums. The past doesn't stay buried. It waits to be remembered whole." The hum deepened, low and kind, like thunder softened by distance. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Evan smiled, not out of peace but out of recognition. "We were never building a house," he whispered. "We were building a memory large enough to live in." The change started quietly. First came the electricity, subtle brownouts that rolled across the old government quarter each night at 3 a.m. Then the air itself began to hum, not loudly, but enough that glasses trembled on windowsills and dogs refused to bark. Evan's recordings leaked into the world without him meaning to. He had left the machine running one night, microphone open to the city. By morning, a low tone identical to the one he'd heard underfoot was broadcasting through half of Washington's AM band, hidden beneath static between patriotic talk shows and late-night weather. Commuters described sudden flashes of memory, faces they had never met, calloused hands laying stone, a smell of lime and sweat. A woman fainted on a bus, waking only to murmur, "They're still building." Archivists, janitors, night guards, all those who worked underground, reported the same dream, a door without hinges, opening inward, revealing not a room but a pulse of light that felt like sorrow made visible. Evan watched the news feed, sleepless. No one connected the reports, but he could feel the pattern, the hum spreading like water through soil, softening what the nation had hardened. In his journal he wrote, "A record cannot be contained once it is remembered." The house was only the first echo. Now the echo is looking for walls large enough to hold it. Outside his window, streetlights flickered in unison. Somewhere beneath the city, the deep rhythm steadied, no longer frantic, no longer hidden, as if the foundation itself were exhaling for the first time in centuries. At first, the city tried to ignore it. Officials blamed resonant frequencies from construction, a glitch in the grid. But engineers who went down to inspect the tunnels beneath the Capitol came back pale and wordless. One man filed a single-sentence report before resigning. "It isn't noise, it's language without words." The vibration grew gentler, almost musical. Windows rattled in patterns that resembled breath. Fountains trembled as though something vast beneath them was sighing. In churches, the organs played faint chords when no one touched the keys. Evan walked through it all like a man underwater. He could feel the rhythm sinking with his heartbeat, and with every beat came a flood of images not his own. Stone dust in sunlight, sweat on rope, laughter cut short by orders shouted from above. He wasn't seeing ghosts, he was feeling continuity. People who had built the world's surface and been written out of it. He began to understand that the voice wasn't demanding vengeance. It was asking to be remembered completely, not as tragedy but as origin, a truth that could no longer fit inside archives. He stood on the steps facing the city and whispered into the wind, "You don't bury a past like this. You plant it, and one day it grows loud enough to shake the marble." The hum softened, then spread outward, past the avenues, past the Potomac, until even the monuments seemed to breathe. For a brief moment the night felt weightless. It wasn't horror anymore. It was the sound of the ground learning how to speak. It didn't stay in Washington. Within weeks, the vibration began surfacing in other places. The old brick cities of the East, the forgotten mills of the South, the prairie towns where courthouse steps still bore chisel marks from another century. People first noticed it through small things: dust lifting in circles on the kitchen floor, porch lights flickering to a rhythm not their own, dreams that felt shared. Everywhere, people began to remember things they'd never lived. In Alabama, a retired mason woke weeping, murmuring that his hands missed the stone. In Chicago, a school custodian heard a hum beneath the gym floor and realized it matched the tempo of his grandmother's lullaby. In Kansas, a farmer unearthed a rusted chain and swore he heard it sigh. Evan gathered these reports like a man trying to map a heartbeat. He pinned them to a wall until the pattern emerged. A slow spiral across the continent, turning inward, pulling memory toward a single idea. The land itself remembers labor. He recorded again that night. This isn't a haunting, It's a recall. What was buried under work and fear and silence is rising through the ground that fed it. When the power grid surged at 3:07 a.m., every radio between Maine and Mississippi carried the same brief sound, a chord, human and mechanical at once. Neither grief nor joy, but something larger, like a breath after centuries of holding it. Those who heard it described the same feeling, not terror, not peace, but an aching clarity, as if the world, for one heartbeat, knew exactly what it had built itself upon. By the time autumn came, the hum no longer startled anyone. It had become part of the weather. People learned to pause when it passed beneath their feet, the way one pauses for thunder. Evan listened too, but now it sounded different, less like a call and more like breathing shared between countless chests. The vibration no longer asked for fear, it asked for attention. Across the country, strangers began to gather without knowing why. They met in church basements, on courthouse lawns, beside rivers where the soil still smelled of iron. No speeches, no flags, just silence held long enough for the air to thicken with memory. When someone finally spoke, the words were simple: "We are still here." Evan started hearing new stories. Families opening boxes of letters long hidden, town records were written to include names erased generations ago. Each act of acknowledgement dulled the tremor slightly, as if every truth spoken loosened a knot in the earth. He wrote in his journal, "The record doesn't punish, it listens. What we call haunting is history's way of asking to be spoken aloud." Yet the closer the world came to stillness, the more Evan felt himself fading. He had become the bridge between silence and sound, and bridges are not meant to keep both shores forever. That night he stood outside the White House fence one last time. The marble glowed faintly under moonlight. It no longer felt cold. He whispered, "If you remember us, you won't need me." And somewhere deep beneath the lawn, the hum answered, soft, almost grateful. The city awoke the next morning to quiet. No hum, no tremor, no whisper underfoot. It was as if the ground had exhaled, letting centuries of memory settle into the bones of the streets, the foundations of the buildings, and the hearts of those who had listened. People noticed subtle changes. Names once forgotten were spoken aloud in town squares, in schoolrooms, in quiet kitchens. Letters that had sat in drawers for generations were opened. Photographs once hidden behind walls were placed on mantels. Even the smallest gestures, the polishing of a stone, the planting of a tree, the simple act of recounting a story, felt like offerings to a history finally acknowledged. Evan walked through Washington, observing the ordinary miracles of remembrance. He saw children tracing lines in sidewalks with chalk, unaware of the centuries beneath their feet, and smiled quietly. The pulse he had carried for so long was gone from him, but it now throbbed gently in the collective awareness of the city. In his journal he wrote his final note: "History does not only live in archives or in books. It lives in the bones we remember, in the stories we dare to speak, in the echoes we leave behind." The room below was never a place to be entered. It was a voice to be heard, and now it is. The air itself felt lighter. The soil beneath the White House seemed to hold its breath one last time, and somewhere, perhaps, a single chain rattled faintly, not as a warning, but as a sigh of relief. Evan's work was done, though he himself had vanished quietly into the city's rhythm, like a ghost that chose to linger in memory rather than body. The White House stood unchanged on the surface. Its walls gleamed in the sun, its gates held the familiar order of power and ceremony. But beneath that veneer, the world had shifted. The room below was no longer hidden. It existed in the act of remembrance, in every whispered name, in every story spoken aloud after centuries of silence. Visitors to the city sensed it. A brief pause in the wind, the soft pulse of the earth beneath their feet, a subtle ache of recognition that made them shiver. They could not see the room, they could not enter it. Yet somehow they knew it was alive. Evan's journal, left in a forgotten archive, contains the final words he wrote. "We built more than stone and mortar. We built memory. We built silence that could speak. The room is not gone. It waits in all of us, in the spaces between what is said and what is remembered. And if we ever forget again, it will awaken." The final shot, A slow pan over the White House lawn at twilight. The shadows lengthen. The wind carries a faint metallic sigh. The hum has ended, but the city feels as if it is listening. Because some rooms never close, some voices never sleep, and some histories are too large to ever be buried.